So switching gears a little bit to Europe, you correctly predicted in your September letter that Greece's problems would come back into headlines, and it sure has. Country's government is having some problems further reducing its budget deficit, which is required for the next round of bailout funds to be given to them. Now, the situation to me looks pretty bleak right now, since the bailout funds are needed in order to avoid default, but the austerity measures have really affected Greece's economic growth pretty significantly. What are we to expect in the next few weeks? I've asked you this in previous videos, but what do you think now? And what do you think, if anything, should be done by Greece's government, the IMF, the ECB, any other organizations to contain this debt crisis?
Well, when it comes to Greece, you have an immediate issue, which is getting the next payment so that they can avoid default on their debt payments, but you still have the longer term what to do about Greece. And let's split the two apart, because the first one is it's still possible to buy some time. It's still, because all you need to do is have the IMF make its disbursement and Europe make its disbursement for the current, and then you can keep paying the bills for another couple of months, but that does nothing whatsoever to solve the long-term problem. So the long-term problem, the investors have already voted, and if you look at the yields now on Greek sovereign debt, there is a 98% probability embedded of default. Can't get much closer to 100% than that. All right, so the investors have already determined that default is inevitable. So why have they made that determination? You reach a certain point in finances, whether it's a country or individually, where the debt is so large that your ability to service it out of current income just becomes impossible. And in the case of Greece, that point was long since passed, and the situation is deteriorating because you engage in activities to reduce your expenditures, but in the process of reducing expenditures, you also suck income out of the economy in general, and the ability to pay taxes goes down. And so you have to look at, when you impose the austerity measures to reduce the expenses, which are supposed to cut the deficit, will that actually have a even worse effect on the revenue collection? And that's actually what's happening. And so every dollar that Greece sucks out of their economy to reduce the deficit actually is reducing revenues by a greater amount, and that's the reduction in GDP. So GDP in Greece is predicted to decline by 5.5% this year. It actually declined at a 7% rate in the second quarter, annual rate. And so the denominator of that public debt to GDP ratio is the denominator's going down. Well, that pushes the whole ratio up. Right. So by that measure, Greek debt is simply exploding in terms of the ability to service it. And that's not a sustainable situation in the long run. So there's only really one solution, and which is what the market is telling you, and that is you've got to restructure the debt. You've got to reduce the amount, and what you do is you take 30 or 50 cents on the dollar, and somebody has to eat that, and that's part of the debate, is how does it get eaten? Right. Now, there's two other things here that need to be considered, and how you resolve it, and there are actually different ways that you could resolve it. You could kick Greece out of the European Union, let them go back to the drachma. And you might think at first blush that would be a good thing, but there are all kinds of ramifications of that, because behind this you have the European banking system, and the European banking system is very fragile at the moment. It depends on, well, we'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, in a moment, but just let's stick with Greece and just say the Greek situation, I think the most likely outcome is we pass this next deadline with a short-term fix, but it is back in our face in fairly short order because the fundamental problems are getting worse. The economy is declining, social unrest is building, the ability of Greece to actually carry through on some of their promises is very limited, and simply the debt's already too large for any of these measures to do any lasting good. And
when something comes ahead, somebody will have to bear the loss. So going further into the European situation, we have lots to talk about. I do have one particular question. As you know, recently some European leaders have looked to emerging markets, larger ones such as Brazil and China, to possibly sell sovereign debt to gain a little bit of relief there. Now, some individuals, including the World Bank president, Robert Zoellick, have voiced concerns about this type of action, arguing that the EU really needs to step back and make cohesive, more significant and larger decisions about its fiscal policy, its monetary union as a whole, and other ways to grow the economy. Given the risks with excessive debt leverage, does financing from Brazil and China and other types of countries even help this situation? And do you agree with these individuals that say, you know, this really isn't the way to solve this problem? You need to do more.
Well, let's talk about Brazil, China, and any other nation that might be available to buy sovereign debt.
Right.
The short answer to your question is that will not solve the problem, because the problems don't have to do with having people available to buy the debt. The problem has to do with there is too much debt. All right? And let's separate the situation into two parts, because we oftentimes find that people confuse liquidity issues with solvency issues. Solvency has to do with what we were just talking about in terms of Greece, too much debt and an inability to service it on an extended basis. Right. You know, problems build up. Liquidity has to do with not being able to find somebody to buy your debt at any particular point in time. Now, the two are interlinked in the sense that if you have a building debt or solvency problem, you're more likely to encounter liquidity problem. So take the French banks, for instance, which a few weeks ago were under tremendous pressure in the marketplace, and indeed not just the French banks, but the European banks in general. And you could see that in their Euribor to swap spread expanded out considerably, which is a measure of funding stress. And it is simply saying traditional sources of funding suddenly dried up, which means, hey, your need to fund doesn't go away, so you have to go find the funds somewhere else. What was done that alleviated the pressure temporarily was for 5 central banks in conjunction with the Federal Reserve to put in place dollar swaps. Actually, that mechanism had already been in place, hadn't been utilized, but it was in place. The innovation that was done was to extend it from 1 week borrowings to 3 months, so that you would not have this constant rollover.
Right.
You know, every day, every event in the marketplace creating potential little crisis. So that's a good thing in the sense of you extend the period of time of lending, kind of send a signal out to the marketplace that you've got the central banks acting in concert, and that did have the effect of quieting down for the moment the issue. And that's a liquidity matter, but what people that watch markets very closely observed is that that risk spread, the Euribor to swap spread, did not come in. So it's saying, well, you provide liquidity, but you really haven't removed the fundamental underlying problem, which is a solvency problem. So the solvency problem goes back to, it's Greece, but it's more than Greece, it's Italy. It's the whole European debt situation as a whole relative to its GDP, and that you have to put it then into the context of what is going on in the global economy, and particularly in the European economy. What is happening right now is the European economy is slowing, may even collectively enter recession. There are some pretty reliable forecasts that Italy and Spain will be in recession within the year, and perhaps the entirety of the European economy. Well, guess what? If you're looking kind of at those simple measures again of solvency, which is public debt to GDP, GDP is shrinking, debt still rising, that begins to force the ratio up, and that's a problem, and that's why the financial markets are nervous. So that's part of what you have to understand. And so when you have Robert Zoellick make those kinds of comments, he's just saying, hey, you can't paper it over by putting up in place liquidity facilities. Those will buy you some time, so it will ease the pressure points, but it doesn't do anything to solve what created the problem in the first place. And so what you've got to do to solve the problem is what has now been attempted in Greece, but it's not working because we actually got too far to
Right.
the point where it was unsolvable without taking drastic action. Well, that's not true in most of the European countries. It's still well within the point of control, but it does mean that you've got to peel back the amount of public spending. You've got to take measures that try to stimulate growth so that you get the GDP going again,
Right.
which is what we're trying to do here in the United States with some mixed results overall. But unless you understand that that is the real problem and you address policies to that, simply doing liquidity measures without addressing the fundamental underlying problems simply buys some time, but the problem gets worse.
Right.
And then it will be back at
You're
you.
addressing one problem while the solvency
And
problem just gets
we
deeper.
turn the clock back a year or 18 months, the European problem has been there all during that time. And each little crisis is a little worse than the previous one. And it's because the problem has been largely treated as a liquidity issue.
And not a solvency
And not a
issue.
solvency. And so, to a certain extent, the problem has been treated, but really through austerity measures as opposed to growth measures. And the austerity measures will work to a point, but they have this consequence of depressing growth and depressing revenues, and you get to the point where
GDP needs to grow too.
it needs to
Right.
grow too.
Yes.
It needs to grow too. So that's essentially what's going on here. And Mr. Zelnick is definitely on the mark. Now, you could have also talked about Christine Lagarde, who's the new president of the International Monetary Fund, who has been very candid and very explicit about there's a need to add more capital to European banks. That simply, given the risks that are out there and the increasing amount of sovereign debt and the potential war default that could be out there somewhere, the European banks are not sufficiently capitalized to absorb that kind of risk. But that also then in turn contributes to the anxiety on the part of investors, creates liquidity problems and so forth.
Right, absolutely. There's no easy fix to this.
No easy fix, but the point I think of these various commentators, Robert Zelnick and Christine Lagarde, is that we are not yet owning up to there are things, hard medicine that needs to be swallowed, actions that need to be taken that are not going to be a whole lot of fun, but they need to happen. And if you don't do that, the problem is going to continue to fester, probably will get a little worse, and eventually it could burst.
Right. Well, as usual, we'll keep an eye on this issue and revisit it in a few
It
weeks.
will be with us for a while, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. Well, those are all the questions I have today. So thank you so much for joining me here, and I will see you again in the next few weeks.
Okay, very good.